social media is a demon, in my opinion. I think what we want to make very clear here is that social media is important. It's a way to get out your message. But there were marches before there was social media, and we are community organizers. We knock on doors. We organize in our local communities across the country. So oftentimes what I see in this generation of activism is that we call this slacktivism, right? It's people who think it's all about the clicking and the retweets. And that's important to put out a message, but it doesn't actually build community power. It doesn't build influence, and it doesn't actually make change. For me, social media is a tool. It does not actually have impact on the actual issues in the communities and the directly impacted communities. Social media will not stop a Muslim ban. Social media will not stop mass deportations in this country. Social media doesn't stop the killing of unarmed Black people in our country. So we have to be really clear about what social media is and what does it mean to be a social media activist. And oftentimes I hear people say that about themselves, that they're social media activists, and I think what you are is more like a publicist or someone who's a commentator, but I think the word activism is really important. Activism is about being active. It's about having transformative relationships with people. And unfortunately, social media does not allow for that. We get into debates on social media. We try to have really important, in-depth conversations and debates with 140 characters. That's just not how the world works. You will never understand points that are going to come across from 140 words, especially if you're taking people out of context, out of sequence, right? People will pull out a tweet and say, that's it, this is who the person is based on one tweet, and literally erasing decades of work that they have done. So be really careful with social media. See it as a tool to put out your, to promote your events, to promote your positions, to promote potentially stories that you hear. And one of the important things about social media, and particularly when we look at the Black Lives Matter movement, which we are very proud to be a part of, is that it allowed for us to actually once and for all say to people, Black people have always been getting killed in our country. Social media did not introduce to us this concept, but what it did was it put it in the face of people that you can no longer deny that unarmed Black people in our country are getting killed at the hands of law enforcement. So what social media does is it raises awareness, but it doesn't address the actual issue. So as long as we have that distinction, as long as we have that understanding, and when we are engaging in a very important conversation, sometimes put that phone down. Maybe private message somebody and say, you know what, I read something that you said, it really bothered me, or this is what my concern is. I'd like to hear a little bit more about where you're coming from and what you're trying to actually say. And unfortunately, social media has not allowed for that. And actually, we subconsciously haven't thought that that might be the way for us to go, and we see the most vitriolic conversation that I have ever witnessed on my life happening on social media. So it's a blessing, but it's also almost the demise of our society.
And what we did at the Women's March is that we, by design, created conversations online through Facebook Live around race and around different issues that we were wanting to introduce. And what was really interesting about that is that we were getting feedback in real time. And not all the feedback was positive. People did not want to have conversations about race. Like Linda's point is, we would post something and it would be taken out of context. There was just this assumption that people knew something about the Women's March or the National Co-Chairs without really exploring who they were, researching who we were, right? But I think what it allowed us to do was to reach the masses of individuals that we, to Linda's point, call slacktivists. Because there are a lot of folks at this moment that aren't necessarily out in the streets. They haven't felt that they are activated yet. They haven't found their purpose or their passion. But it allowed them to kind of engage in a conversation that they weren't having prior to November 9th. Right. And so for us, it was a tool, but it wasn't the end of our organizing, because we needed to have the conversations with people. We needed to make sure that we were calling our friends, we were calling our cousins, we were calling different organizations to actually bring them and champion them to our cause. And those conversations were not easy. A lot of people initially were asking us, what's going on with the permit? Although Bob will say that there are tens of thousands of people that were going to march without even having a permit, right? And also without knowing what they were marching for.
We were going to go to Washington, D.C. without a permit.
Right.
Sure. And we've been everywhere.
And I wanted to say something. I just wanted to follow up with two things. Because I'm the one that always wants to clarify everything.
Yeah.
I'm here, might as well, right? Number one, we actually won the 2017 Webby Awards, right? And we won the Webby Awards as a quote social media movement. And it really bothered me. I went to the Webby Awards because I knew there was going to be some amazing people there. When I was sitting there, Tamika was like, I'm not going. But I went and I was proud of that. But the conversations I had at the Webby Awards was, we're not a social media movement.
Right.
We are a movement that is made up of organizers and activists. And people didn't just magically show up in Washington, D.C. There were people that organized and coordinated buses. There were people that organized their church groups, their synagogues, their mosques, their public schools. Like, there were real life people who were talking to real life human beings that figured out how to get to the march. We had Sister March organizers. You didn't just show up to New York and boom, there was a march. There were people who actually had to do physical labor to ensure that there was a march. In Washington, D.C., we had, that's not magic that jumbotrons just show up at the Women's March, or that you see a huge stage, or that Gloria Steinem tripped and fell into the Women's March. Like, these are actual real life conversations that had to have. So I think for folks to understand that while the Women's March was what we call maybe sparked on social media, it was a movement of people that actually had to have real life conversations. And what actually happened at the Women's March, I don't care what Women's March you were at. We've been to LA, we've been to Arkansas, you name the state, we've been in it, and we've met with people who went to the Women's March. And what they'll say to us is, it was the best day of my life. And I ask people, why is it the best day of your life? You know, I'm sure you got married, you probably had a couple of kids. And what people said, and I felt the same way, is that people felt, for the first time, they felt like they were part of a beloved community.
Yeah.
They felt so safe in a space with strangers. Imagine that, you're with people, you never met these people before, they are around you. And there were people at the Women's March at the end when we walked out into the crowd just to see what was going on after the program was over. People said, FYI, we were standing on this street right here, we didn't hear a damn thing that you were saying.
Yeah.
Because there was not enough jumbotrons, because you're organizing a march for 250,000 people and then an extra 1 million people come. You just don't have enough sound, enough for those people. But guess what? They didn't care.
Yeah.
Because they were engaging in real life conversations there. People from, like, you know, undocumented women from Pennsylvania are talking to like white women from Nebraska, right? You had Muslim women who came from buses from Michigan that were talking to black women from Georgia. Like, it was the first time that even some communities who may never have interacted on a personal level had. And that was the motivation for us to continue the work of the Women's March, right? Because we felt like we're on to something here. We're on to bringing people who don't ordinarily organize together, and social media is an important part of that, but I want to keep emphasizing that the real work happens with us having really important conversations. And I say to people all the time, we are living in a dire situation, and social media is not going to save us. When an undocumented family on your street is about to get hauled off by ICE, social media is not going to do anything for them. Guess who's going to protect them? Their neighbors. You're going to protect them. How will you protect them? You have to know who they are. You have to knock on their door and say, by the way, I live 2 houses down from you. If you ever need anything from me, here's my phone number. If you ever need to leave your children, if something were ever to happen, here I am for you. And that's the kind of sentiment and community that we are invested in building, and it has to happen one person at a time, or we are going to be in some serious trouble if we are not already in serious trouble.
I just want to make sure we talk about the other side of social media, because I think, you know, you brought a good point. Asking the question, how does social media work? So what happened right after, I mean, we were catching a little flack. It was a lot, but a little. Little for us. It was a lot, but we were able to handle it. But you definitely don't want to get caught in the crosshairs of Black Twitter. That's not a place where you want to get caught up, because you will. So Bob had it hard. But after the Women's March, the hate that we received on social media and that we continue to receive today of people who don't even know one another, just a very, very quick story for me. First of all, I get Linda's hate mail on my social media every day, and I know Carmen does as well. In my DMs, people send me terrible things that I don't ever share with her, because she's so happy and bubbly all the time. And for me to tell her that someone sent a message saying that they were going to kill her today is not something that I want to put on her. But after the NRA protest that we did, which was one of our next mass mobilizations, if you will, we marched from the NRA headquarters to Washington, D.C., over 18 miles. in the 125-degree weather.
And monsoons.
And monsoons. It was terrible. All the weather that you could have, it happened in one day. And, you know, after a few days, and this was during the time while people were really attacking all of us. They kind of started with me, and then they went to Carmen and Linda, and for some reason they left the white lady out. We're still trying to figure it out. Like, she was with us. She was like hanging out with us, but they didn't get her, so I don't understand. But they, you know, I told you my son's father was murdered, and one day I was going through my social media, just kind of checking out all the hateful things that they were saying about me, and I saw an actual picture of my son's father's body bag when he was being lifted out of the ditch. Someone went and found that and put it on the internet. Now I have an 18-year-old child, and thankfully I told y'all he's crazy, so he's not concerned with like looking at all these things. He's like, if it's Cardi B, he's on Cardi B. You know what I'm saying? Like, he is on what's popping. If it's Cardi B or Westbrook or one of those things, he's on those issues. You better be on that science, reading, and we used to say reading, writing, and arithmetic in our house, right? So you better be on that too. But I'm so glad, and I don't know if whenever he sees it, because it never goes away. Mm-hmm. So whenever he sees that photo that he has never ever been exposed to, we've always sort of kept that away from him. I'm not sure how he's going to deal with the fact that just because his mother stands up for him and other people who look like us and all of you who are in this room, that someone would be so evil as to take a picture of his deceased father and put it on the internet to try to get at me because they're angry that I'm speaking out for justice. So that's the other side of social media, which means that building community there is not, you can't do all your work on social media because you're dealing with people who are literally crazy and they're sitting in their mama's basement somewhere just typing away and doing any and everything that they can to try to make you feel as unsafe as possible.
And one of the things that we encourage within the Women's March is to have courageous conversations. Those daring discussions. Don't sit with the yaysayers, right? Don't sit with the people that think like you. Actually sit with those that don't have the same views as you. Because in the end, we actually have the same values. We all want to feel safe in our communities. We want to go to, you know, schools that provide quality education. We want to have, you know, take care of our families. But how we get there is sometimes different. And for us, what we always encourage is to have courageous conversations and to actually connect to each other's humanity. And so outside of social media, it's what we wanted to do every single day. And we did it through the conversations. And we got blasted. The Women's March was not an easy thing to organize. We had full-time jobs. We run our own organizations. We have our teams. We are executive directors, we're members of this, we're board members of that, but we felt it was our responsibility to ensure that the most marginalized communities were at the center. And we actually took one for the team. That's something that we constantly say. We had to make sure that we were there, that we were talking about race, we were talking about white privilege, we were talking about immigration reform, criminal justice, we were talking about indigenous folks. But unfortunately, it also took a toll on our soul. Because we had to make sure that, and you know, it was beautiful that we got to organize with people we never met with before. You know, it was all of a sudden, you know, we talk about King and nonviolence. Dr. King talks about creating the beloved community and keeping your eyes on the prize. We were constantly like, okay, just keep your eyes on the prize, low, you know, high impact, low ego. Unfortunately, there were times where we had to have courageous conversations within our own space of organizing because white privilege showed up every single day. We fight injustice, and there's moments where we use our hands like this, and this offends people. Our tone offends people, right? We're like, what'd you say?
Exactly.
And you're like, well, I said this. And other people are like, we don't like your tone.
Yeah.
And it was really hard because not only were we fighting, or not fighting, building within, right? It's building because we're building bridges. But we were having to also get blasted by some people who were like, why are you even there? Why are you organizing with the white women? This is a white women's march. Trans people were like, we need to center more trans folks. And we're like, okay, indigenous people, there aren't enough indigenous people. Then there remember the white men that were telling us,
Oh, yeah.
the white men that were in our inboxes,
Why is it not the People's March?
why is it not
Why is it the
the
Women's March?
No, let me tell you, I've been planning. So one of the first responsibilities that I ever had in my life was to plan a march, right? So if you ever want to do a march, just call me, because I'm a march lady. I know how to plan a march with my eyes closed. I had white men telling me I didn't know what I was doing, that there was no way that I could plan a march. I'm like, dude,
And that
I
was
may not be able to plan a march, I may not be able to solve the problems, but I definitely know how to put a stage up on a corner and get some people with some porta potties. People kept saying to us, are you gonna have porta potties? It became a big conversation, and let me just say this to you. Know what you don't know. There were people who were like, there's no way we can have enough porta potties out there, and I'm not going to the march because there's not gonna be anywhere to use the bathroom. We were like, dude, porta potties? Like, we got porta potties. We trying to figure out if you understand. Right, we have
Sold out all the porta potties in Washington, yeah.
because actually, if you know anything about organizing marches, the permit says that you have to have X amount of porta potties to meet the mass crowd. So hell, porta potties, like we're trying to figure out if you know the names of those people who've been killed by police violence in this country, and you talking about some damn toilets.
Right.
Sorry, one last thing. I'm fired, yeah. This is like therapy session.
Right.
So one of the headlines or front pages of the Washington Post that's gonna go down in history, believe it or not, is a copy of our permit.
Yeah.
And I could not believe that a reputable newspaper would think that the permit was actually a story, that the Women's March got a permit. And I remember this guy, this journalist asked me and was like, permit. I said, let me ask you a question. I said, did you ever ask the Reverend Al Sharpton if he had a permit? Did anybody ever ask Dr. Martin Luther King if he had a permit? Did anyone ever ask the Reverend Jesse Jackson if he had a permit to march? Because we were women, people fundamentally believed that we had no idea what we were doing. So this idea of sexism was showing up, even in the way in which we were. It was almost like people were sitting back, waiting for us to fail.
Right.
And one of the reasons why we did what we did, and we worked 20 hours a day, we didn't go home to our families during the holidays, was because we were not about to fail. Because maybe we didn't get the first woman president in November, but you better damn believe that women were going to lead the largest single-day protest in U.S. history, and that is exactly what we did. So, I'm saying,